Hello and welcome to another episode of the Empowered Hormones podcast. I'm your host, Sheridan Decker. And this episode, I have something different for you guys. I have the privilege of speaking to my cousin and also my best friend, Megan. So today we're going to chat about a range of different topics. Don't really know where the conversation is going to take us, but things that a lot of you guys struggle with that Megan and me feel like we talk about on a daily or even, a weekly basis is a lot of these health conditions that I guess women struggle with day to day. So things like your endo, your immune system, fatigue, pregnancy, exercising, pulling that in, the impact of stress and your life. So we're going to have a chat about that, have a listen to Megan's story, because I think a lot of you will resonate with it, especially as young mums, but also as women with heavy, painful periods and a lot of the symptoms around that. So thank you for jumping on the podcast with me today.
My pleasure.
So I want to start right at the beginning. And for you guys, we've literally just been chatting about this. So I'm going to pull it back to where we were talking 30 seconds ago. But we're chatting about your periods and when they started. And you said they started around 11, yeah?
Yes, November 30th when I was 11. So a couple of months before I turned 12. And I was definitely the first in my grade to have gotten my period.
Well, I feel like 11's quite early, or not?
Yeah, it is, which I've since found is a marker of endometriosis, which I've more recently been diagnosed with and been treated for. Yeah.
What age were you diagnosed with endo?
Well, at my surgery earlier this year. So that was a long journey. The word was used a lot, but currently the only diagnostic tool is a laparoscopy, which I had, what was that, in March or April this year? Yeah. So that's when I was diagnosed with endometriosis and adenomyosis. But obviously that kind of journey took 12 years to get to my surgery.
Did they suspect it all? Because for those who don't know, Megan is now 30. Is that correct? Yeah. So that's a 12-year journey. But did they not at that point suspect it at all? Or was it just one of those things that they kind of go, you've got, because you present with all the symptoms across the board, the heavy, painful periods, low iron, all that stuff.
Yeah. I remember seeing a GP when I was in 2015 because my periods, I started to realize they were a problem. And looking back, there were patches in my life where, like, I've struggled with low iron since I was 17 or 18. Well, that's when it was first raised.
Yeah.
So I've been having iron infusions every 6 to 12 months for 12 years, up until now, pretty much. And it was never raised by anybody. I saw gastroenterologists. I had colonoscopies and endoscopies and all sorts of stuff. I had polyps. They were looking at celiac disease, and everything was investigated except for endometriosis. And no one even asked me about my periods, and I didn't think to talk about them because I didn't know what was normal. It wasn't discussed in my home growing up, or I didn't talk about it with my friends. I do remember working as a lifeguard when I was 19 and being outside and fainting from the heaviness and the pain of my period. But I just didn't really think to go and see anybody.
There must be that. Yeah, there must be a spectrum of that endo severity though, right? Because like fainting from the pain, that seems really severe to me, whereas there must be women who just have heavy, painful periods who've still got endo. So is there a scale, and were you at the severe end of endometriosis?
Well, interestingly, my endometriosis is only a level 2. But I also have adenomyosis, which is when the endometrial tissue also grows in the walls of my uterus. And so it's a separate condition. And that is where the significant portion of my pain comes from. Because since my laparoscopy, I don't have the heaviness anymore. I used to have periods that would go on for up to 7 days. And they were so heavy, I'd feel like I was just wetting myself basically. And that has subsided with the endometriosis treatment, but the pain that I have, the joint pain, back pain, rubbing down my legs, the fainting, that comes from the adenomyosis, which is only really treatable by hysterectomy. You can use hormonal birth control, but that has never, ever agreed with me. So I'm not going down that line.
Adenomyosis, like endometriosis, laparoscopy is obviously our gold standard for identifying it. Adenomyosis, is that saying that you have to do surgery?
So basically the gold standard of diagnosing adenomyosis is actually to have a hysterectomy and then to look at the uterus after it's been removed. But my adenomyosis is severe enough that you can see it from the outside of my uterus. So a lot of women go in for a laparoscopy with all of the symptoms of endometriosis, and they don't have a very experienced surgeon, which is very common. And they say, we didn't find any endometriosis. There's nothing wrong with you. And then in further years, they have a hysterectomy because the problems are so significant. And they do biopsies of the uterus and find all this endometrial tissue and scar tissue and all throughout the walls of the uterus. So mine had got to a point where you could see that from the outside, the smooth tissue of the outside of the organ, which is not so common. That's a fairly severe presentation of it.
So symptom-wise, like the things that we, seem to continually talk about between the two of us, as far as your symptoms, is obviously the heavy, painful period, but also bloating and gut stuff as well. Is there any way of identifying with your symptoms between the two? Because the adenomyosis symptoms are so similar.
Yeah, so the adenomyosis symptoms are often more the pain. So the pain does present a little bit differently. And I can say that now because all of my endometriosis has been removed. And that was recently. So I don't think there's really many adhesions there. So the adenomyosis pain is the pain that goes down my legs into my ankles, and my knees and my ankles feel enlarged. Sounds funny. Feel enlarged and are throbbing. And there's this really intense heaviness in my legs, and it goes up my back. And kind of my lower, where my uterus is, there's this really deep throbbing pain. It's kind of like, the endometriosis pain is more like a graze or a cut, and the adenomyosis is like a broken bone. It's that deep throbbing feeling.
Yeah.
So that's what I still had post-surgery. And when I went back to my surgeon 8 weeks or so, I was probably 12 weeks after my surgery, and I said that this is what I was experiencing. She said, well, this makes sense because this is why.
Yeah.
And often the symptoms of endometriosis is more the week before the period, which is not so much what I got. It was the first few days or the first 3 days of my period that was really painful rather than the lead up to it.
Yeah.
And I can manage that with lifestyle choices. If I don't run, I run a lot. If I don't run, I get a lot of joint pain. I haven't run so much in the last couple of weeks because I had a race mid-month. So I didn't run much 2 weeks before my period. So this one's been a really sore one. Obviously, I added a colossal amount of cortisol to my system doing the trail race that I did. So that doesn't really help. And also making good food choices and not getting dehydrated, and all of those things make my symptoms better over my period. And dim.
Yeah.
Which has changed my life.
Yeah, because
I'm not going to try to say the name. Because,
no. But on top of your on top of your hormone issues, and I see this a lot with women presenting side on side with SIBO and endo, but you've had the run of gut stuff as well. We talk about, the bloating and the constipation and, those things have been huge for you.
Yeah, and interestingly, which we haven't touched on this, but I have 2 sets of twins. And there is about a 22-month gap between them, 23.
Yeah, soak that in,
And
people listening to that. 2 sets of
Yeah.
twins in a
Casually.
very short time period.
Yeah. So there's a reason for my story though. When I was breastfeeding my first set of twins, one of my son had cow's milk protein intolerance, so I wasn't having any cow's milk or any whey or anything with casein in it or soy. So between that and obviously my hormones being different due to not menstruating because I was breastfeeding, and that lasted for a year, my gut was the best it's ever been. I was never bloated. Everything moved through properly. I felt good. My energy was a lot better. But every other time in my life, I'm bloated most of the time, unless I'm extremely restrictive with my diet or simply just don't eat too much at all.
Yeah.
So my triggers are the dairy. I can't really have any dairy now. I do.
When did that start, the dairy stuff? Because it's not, gluten's not so much an issue for you, is it?
I obviously bake on my own sourdough, so my bread's not an issue. But if I eat, I'll say shop bought gluten, so something that I haven't baked, that's a trigger.
Yeah.
But I have not tolerated dairy for as long as I can remember. It's always something.
Even as a kid?
No, as a kid it was fine. It was probably since I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if it's actually dairy or not, because sometimes I can get away with it and sometimes I can't. And I don't seem to be able to pick when it is. I do notice that the first, 10 days of my cycle I can get away with eating differently. But it's definitely more processed foods or processed wheat.
Because, a lot of women, it's lactose if it's gut stuff, but then if it's the immune component like endo, then dairy seems, or milk proteins seem to be such a big trigger.
Yeah, it's not lactose for me. It is, but too much butter will do it, too much cream will do it. Yeah. Anything will. Anything just triggers it, basically. If it was lactose free, I could still have lactose free yogurt and milk, but I can't.
So were you surprised that you had 2 sets of twins then? Because a lot of women talk about endo in that sense of like infertility, like pain with sex, infertility, all those heavy painful periods and things. I suppose you didn't have the endo diagnosis when you fell pregnant.
Well, interestingly, between my sets of twins, I went and saw a naturopath.
Oh, yeah.
And she said to me, "You've got endometriosis." And I said, "How do you know that?" And she's just said, "Oh, I can just tell." So it had definitely been flagged with me between the sets.
Yeah.
I had a miscarriage before my first set of twins.
Yeah.
About 4 months before them. And this was the trigger for me actually getting help for my periods, because my periods were as heavy as my miscarriage before my surgery. So that's when I thought, oh, this isn't fine. They just got significantly worse and worse. What did you ask me? Oh, yeah. So if I think about it, yes, so many people struggle with fertility, which really I do not. Although I wonder whether I have 2 sets of fraternal twins, so I release 2 eggs each time.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether that is part of the endometriosis. And then I also read the other day that people with adenomyosis are more likely to have multiple pregnancies, multiple as in or high order multiple. Yeah. But I'm very fortunate to have had children and been super fertile and carry them both full term.
Yeah.
And birth them and breastfeed them long term. And it's not lost on me that for someone with the degree of endometriosis and adenomyosis I have, is that wasn't part of my struggles.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like you said, so many people struggle with the infertility and stuff, and obviously quite blessed down that aspect. But then I guess to think about endo, you're thinking about there's genetic components, and then we're thinking, and same with the endo. I always say it wrong.
Adeno. I took me ages
to get your mouth around it. Yeah. The immune side of things, and I know like our family history of immune stuff is shit with neutropenia. My mum, you, grandma, like we all kind of have that in a sense.
But we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Neutropenia.
Yeah. I just think like the drivers from that immune aspect and then the hormonal aspect. But then, like you're saying, your periods really kicked up when you're 16, 17?
Yeah, when I was 17. Well, my whole health turned to shit at 17, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I left school, we were just discussing this before. I really struggled in school, socially and academically, in the sense that I couldn't focus, which I now know is undiagnosed ADHD, the inattentive ADHD.
Yeah.
So basically, when I left school and went to university, it's like my body was just out of that situation and then I got really sick and I had tonsillitis. I'm not joking, fairly permanently for about 6 months until we found a surgeon who would take them out while I was sick.
Wow.
So I pretty much lived on antibiotics for 6 to 12 months, which is probably a good part of my gut problems, really.
Well, yeah, but I had this one vivid memory when we were growing up and we were out at Nanga Bush Camp at a big family get-together.
Yes, I was gluten-free then.
Yes, and I remember it coming up that
I didn't remember that.
Yeah.
I was 15.
Yeah, and I remember it being like Megan's
all of this stuff.
got health issues, but it wasn't.
I just remembered I had all of these gut problems. Sorry to talk over you. I had all of these gut problems. I would get sick after I completely forgot all this. I got really sick after I ate, and I went to the doctor with my mum, and I was getting barium meals and I don't know, some other test where I was like laying in an MRI machine after drinking some other kind. They did the most bizarre test thinking back because I'd get sick after eating certain things and they thought there was something wrong with my, what's the organ that creates bile?
Yeah, your pancreas.
Yeah, they thought that I couldn't process fats. And never once did I do a celiac test. My periods weren't looked into. None of that. I can't believe got all this.
Well, I just remember that because we weren't, I mean, we were friends, but we were young. If you were 15, I was like 13. And I just remember some being like, oh, it's Megan, she's sick again or something, you know, because it was always like, Megan's being sorry.
I'm so misunderstood. I'm so misunderstood.
But that's partly now that you have this diagnosis, but also you think about the immune shit your body was fighting back then already. Like that's 15 years ago.
So when I was so sick with tonsillitis, I was diagnosed with cyclic neutropenia, which is really, really rare. Usually people who are neutropenic are cancer patients.
Yes.
It's not really something that's commonly seen, and I've seen so many hematologists because I'd go see a new GP and they'd be like, oh, your white blood cell count's really low. And it dips down to 0.6, which is significantly low.
Yeah.
And I can notice when there's a dip because I'll hurt myself and things won't heal. And I did have one major hospitalisation after my first set of twins.
That's right.
With an infection that could not be treated.
Yeah.
I don't know if I go into that. We'll be here forever if I go into it all. But I did. I had lumps, breast lumps. So they did a biopsy because our great-grandmother died of breast cancer. And they pierced a milk duct because my big twins were 12 weeks old. And so I had milk leaking out. When I had letdowns, I had milk leaking out of the incision site. And that got really infected and I had a huge bout of cellulitis. I was on the most intense antibiotics and they couldn't treat it until someone just came in and suctioned all the infection out, and I was on IV antibiotics for a couple of weeks. And there are more antibiotics for a month or 6 weeks after.
But that immune stuff is interesting because I want you to circle back to what they said that neutropenia was, because I just want to resonate really quickly on that. I literally went to a GP on Friday and said, I just want to get my white blood cells checked because I haven't had it done in 2 years and just see where they're sitting. I said, I've got a history of neutropenia. And then she was like, why? And then it's like they have this single track of what's going on. I'm like, it's fine. I've been down the track. They've done the bone marrow biopsies. They've looked for cancer. It's not cancer. I'm actually okay. Like it's crazy. It's frustrating. But you said they diagnosed you with what do they call it? What did you just call it?
Well, they've said it's an autoimmune condition where my body produces white blood cells and then attacks it.
Okay.
And so then they're gone again. So they've just said it's autoimmune.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I also had the bone marrow testing
Yeah.
and it is when you see a new GP, it's almost like they're a bit bored and they see something exciting and they want to chase it. But that's frustrating when you have, I've been dealing with this since I was 18. And my GP, who is incredible, has just left me.
Yeah.
So I'm currently going through this whole thing of going through it all, saying, yeah, got it sussed.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So at the crux of it, like if you think about when this stuff sort of started coming on and like obviously you already had the genetic predisposition for some of this stuff because we do in a sense. And then there's also like the immune stuff you couldn't control obviously as a child and whatnot. And as you've gotten older, you're better at managing or understanding what your triggers are with stress and diet and lifestyle and stuff. But then there's the whole hormonal component. And when you are stressed and put, any young female body, and I mean, you're young when you had kids, but any young female body under 2 sets of twins is a lot for anybody. Plus, you like to run and compete and exercise and do that side of things as well. Plus, you're a caregiver and a caring person at your core. So you take on more than your general person tends to as well. So you've got all these compounding factors, which would just drive all your conditions.
Yeah. It is just a bit out of control. And I think I think a lot of the conditions were exacerbated by chronic stress, basically. And that was stress through school because that was a nightmare. And then I basically moved here by myself to Tasmania. I grew up in Western Australia. I moved to Tasmania by myself when I was 20. And I just kind of rolled from one thing to the next. And obviously my second set of twins really took it out of me because I was pregnant with twins, 37 weeks, had a C-section, breastfed exclusively for 14 months, pregnant with twins again, carried them for 40 weeks, had them naturally, breastfed for another 2 years. I had 2 bouts of shingles in that second.
It's just going to bring out the shingles,
because it was 3 bouts of shingles, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. I had one towards the end of last year. My body was just on a colossal amount of stress, and I don't help myself because my time to myself is going to go run for 1 to 8 hours. So I should probably take up crochet. I do that. I'm like, I've signed up for this, and I haven't told you yet, but I signed up for a 70-kilometer trail race in March.
Wow.
And I was going to do that last year, but this year I got COVID.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think, why, you're so tired. You've just got a puppy. Life is so hectic. Why are you doing this? But it feeds my soul and I love it. And I'd go nuts without it, but it's cortisol.
But let's be real. You do slow things as well. You garden, you have chooks, you have ducks, you faff around the house, you bake, you make sourdough. Like you're also, you do those things. No, you could probably, I don't know, switch out running for reading, but you already read, like you already do that stuff. So it would be giving up something that, yes, it gives you that cortisol, which obviously makes you feel good across your whole body because it dampens any sort of inflammatory response. And it's time out for you. And in someone whose head is so constantly overwhelmed with 4 gorgeous little voices, it's a total mental switch off.
Yeah. And you're right, I do. My life is generally slow, or I try to make it as slow as possible. My whole ethos behind raising all my little people is to give them a very wild and feral childhood. So I don't have a beautifully curated Instagram feed of lovely dressed kids because they're mostly naked outside in a duck pond or whatever. So I spend as much time as I can in nature, at home, in the garden. My 5-year-old daughter could bake sour. If I walked out the door and said that I'm coming back tomorrow and I need bread, she would know what to do. And that's a big part of the slower life I'm trying to create for them. Also because I don't want my daughters to grow up and kind of play into the really hectic, hustle, busy life. I'm not interested in that. And I think it just burns people out.
Yeah. Another thing we've chatted about from time to time is just this kind of on a sense, and it's not, neither of us are medical professionals in that sense, but this social anxiety type thing of just wanting to withdraw some time as well. And sometimes the more health stuff or things we have going on at home with kids and family life and being a young mum and all that stuff, it can be, or it must be, I'm not speaking from your experience, but it must be isolating and hard at times as well to, I don't know, get out there and be able to socialise when you've got all these responsibilities too.
And also symptoms. Symptoms keep me home a lot. Sometimes not so much now since my surgery, although it took a solid 4 months for my surgery to settle. That was really, really tough. The surgery took a lot out of me, and I've still not bounced back physically with my running and fitness. Even though I'm running the same things, I don't feel as good. But the symptoms keep home: bloating, pain. Sometimes my periods was so heavy I couldn't leave the house for longer than 2 hours because I'd bleed through no matter what I would use, kind of thing, to protect myself. But having kids is inherently isolating because you have to be home. I found it hard to go out, particularly with my first set of twins. So you kind of start from scratch a bit, and I'm only just starting to, join a book club and meet new people and whatever. And my big twins are 6 in a couple of weeks, and it took that long really to find my feet as a human again. And
they just started school a couple of days a week, so it's given you a couple of days of a little bit more free time, I guess.
Yeah, one set of twins, it's a dream.
Yeah.
One set of twins is so easy.
Having the work. I guess, it's all those things that compound add on. What day to day, or maybe across a week basis, what do you reckon your biggest or hardest symptoms are that you struggle with?
Bloating, for sure.
Yeah.
Bloating and abdominal discomfort.
Yeah.
And I get really clogged up unless I'm really, really good at taking gym, which has been a game changer for me. Still not foolproof because I can be my own worst enemy in not making good choices. And fatigue is a huge one. I'm so tired. But my eye's not low at the moment, so can't blame that. And it's really easy to just say, I've got little kids, I'm tired. But really, I sleep pretty well. I have between 1 and 4 kids in my bed, but I do sleep a lot better than I have for a long time. And I do think part of that is my body working so hard to fight infection. And if I don't exercise regularly, if I'm not out there running, 25 to 40, 50K a week, my joints hurt and my body doesn't work properly. And even though the running tires me out, it keeps me well, basically. So I genuinely need that.
Yeah. If you were looking back at, let's say, 16-year-old Megan now and going, what advice, what would you say to her? Would you say go get counselling? Would you say go get endo looked at? Would you what kind of things would you be screaming at her?
Yeah, the biggest thing, honestly, the driving factor behind all of this was to go find out about the inattentive ADHD, because when that is managed, I can manage everything else better. So things would flow on from that, because if that was managed, I wouldn't have had the chronic stress. I would have got myself to a decent GP, not a, just call up and book an appointment, like a functional GP or an integrative GP or something like that. Someone who would actually look at the whole picture and not just say, oh, you're just someone who needs iron infusions every 6 months. And I had that many iron infusions. I remember feeling excited when the new form of iron infusion came out and I didn't have to sit in a cancer ward for 6 hours. I distinctly remember that happening.
Wow.
So
when you say manage,
everyone needs therapy.
I
don't know. There's lots of things I would tell 16-year-old self, but get therapy and see a doctor.
When you say manage, do you mean just start medication younger for it, or how do you manage it? How do you how does that even? What does that look like?
Well, one, just having an understanding that you don't have the same levels of dopamine that other people do. So the
Mm.
things that you find hard are different to other people, and all the shame associated with that is colossal. So for a long time, I just thought I was useless and everyone else was, could do life and I couldn't. And when I started medication, I thought, well, if this is how other people live, this is like a superpower, basically. And then it's not even the medication so much. It's having that kind of grace for yourself, which mothers need. We need to have way more, I say this, but I don't take my own advice, but we need to have so much more grace for ourselves. We just have to be good enough mothers and show up for our kids enough of the time, knowing that we won't show up all the time. But also having systems in place to say, all right, I know that I'm really bad at time management, which I am terrible at time management. And I just have to find ways around that. And you can be a perfectly functional human being. Another thing that I love about it is the hyper focus, because it means that I can, and you know this, I know so much about so much.
Oh, you do. It's insane, people. When she gets a diagnosis or something on her mind, or it's trail running, or it's something with the kids, or it's a sourdough starter, or whatever it is, Megan will be the pro at it.
I go deep. I go so deep.
Yeah.
And it means that I can do trail races and really be able to focus and have the drive. When I did that first trail marathon, the 46K one last year, I was getting so little sleep. I'd only just weaned my little twins, and 2 weeks before I ran the race, I found out my ferritin levels were 6. But because I was just in this hyper focus mode, I mean, physically it's probably shocking for me to have done that, but mentally it was really good to be able to just drill in on something and achieve it, because that gives you so much. And as a mum, often you're doing the same things over and over again. It's marathon day. And to just go out and do something that's not child related and something that's a bit different gives you, well, a massive dopamine boost, which we all need, but a sense of achievement outside of just not just being a mum and a housewife. But you know what I mean. Something that you can carry in yourself and still be yourself as a person.
And I mean,
as well as a mum.
Yeah. And the thing is, like you said, that's got to come from you as well. Like we talk, for everyone listening, me and Megan talk nearly every day. If we miss a day or two, we both feel guilty and shit over it. And we try and make it up.
We had a week for a bit. We both got the ball at the same time, which we often don't do.
No, and it'll be,
how are you?
It'll be multiple voice messages, and we're both, sharing symptoms or whatever. And Megan's had every health condition that I've had. So if something flares up for me, she's had it, and vice versa. The latest one has been a lot of vaginal stuff, which has been fun. But I think what it comes down to for you as well is that understanding of who you are and the symptoms you struggle with. And like you said, you tell yourself, in a sense, about that diagnosis and to get therapy, because at the end of the day, you can have people who love you like me telling you that I think you're enough and it's okay and you're worthy and I think you're beautiful. But if you're juggling all these things in your head and you're struggling with who you are and these diagnoses and the way you react to things and gaslighting yourself and all that shit, then it's crap in a sense as well. You're still going around in circles. So until you sort of feel like you have something solid to hold on to, and you've got a multiple of diagnoses now, and that doesn't make things better or fix them, but it helps you maybe understand yourself better.
Yeah. And that was honestly all this year because I found a good GP. I just kind of bounced between GPs and kept thinking for all of these years, like, what is wrong with me? Why can everyone else function fine? Until I got a GP who got me a good hematologist, sorted that out, got me a good immunologist, sorted out that. And she just went through the list and ticked everything off. And now I'm 31 in 6 weeks.
And stop it.
I know, getting old. And I have just sorted so much shit out for myself this year because I had a good doctor who put in the work. Like, she would give you a ring on her off days and say, how are you going? How's this going? She was brilliant. And you can't do that without really good medical professionals. And like you as well. You do so much for me. How often do I message you and say, what do I do?
Disclaimer to anyone listening, Megan has not done a stool test. So if you're wondering why my best friend is bloated, please don't blame me and think that I don't look after.
No. And honestly, it's because I cannot handle anything more.
Exactly.
Like, I will get there. But this year, whatever I've had 2 surgeries.
Oh.
And 3 diagnoses.
Yeah.
Like the neutropenia was a while ago. So it's been a massive, massive year in that sphere already. And like, I know my limits.
Oh, exactly.
I know my limits when I hit a wall and fall into the ground, basically.
And it'd be information overload for you, let's be honest, because you'll go down on every single bacteria that shows up in there and you'll want to know every single thing about it. And it will not be good for your mental health at all to have that knowledge. And at the end of the day, you know to a limit how to manage it. You know with your diet and your exercise and some of your supplements how to sort of manage it. But like every woman listening, life takes over and this shit, we drop ball. Like that's just what happens.
Yeah. And I definitely noticed that, and we talk about this often, I often really admire how motivated and disciplined you are with your diet and how you eat, and you've got absolutely
I don't have 4 kids.
And then I think, well, my breakfast was honestly just someone's leftovers because it was too good to feed to the chooks. Well, I can't feed everything to my chooks. They have a pretty good. They eat better than I do. Actually, they'll eat more vegetables than I will in a day. But I do just kind of bounce between things, and if I'm really sleep deprived, I really struggle to kind of stay on track. And I keep saying, when things settle down, they don't.
It's time and place, though. It's every female's like that. It's time and place, and it's priority of things, right? And I think for you, your big stuff is stress, immune, hormones, and gut. Like the top things is the stress thing, because when your stress is better managed in the sense that you're not carrying as many glass balls at once, trying not to drop them, then you have more time and space for these other things. And that's every female ever, you know, like we know our limits. Yeah.
Some of my kids have their little things going on, big things going on. And that also takes up a huge amount of brain space and stress, because we don't stress about anything more than we stress about our children. So that takes up a lot of my head, and they come before all those other things about me. So it's not a restrictive factor. I don't want to put it that way, but
I think
pulled into life, basically, and you just survive, and that's all it is. And I hate the idea of survival mode. I don't think any of us should have to live in survival mode, and so many of us do. So many of us are just blindly going through life, just getting day by day, and I think that's no way to live. But I live like that a lot of the time as well.
And in a sense, you're not alone either, you know, like there's going to be so many women listening to this going, I resonate to Megan on so many levels. And that sense of just the kids, the juggling, the immune, the gut stuff, the headspace, the time, the money, the wanting to be the mum, the also needing to look after itself. And
I work now. That's kind of it's not a lot, but I'm back building inspecting, which I was doing before my big twins. And even just 6 to 12 hours a week. Somehow you fit that in, and then there's even less time to make sure I make good choices for my endo, because that's a big thing, is eating enough oily fish and trying to find a way to eat sardines. Sardines are disgusting. Because they are vile. The smoked ones are good. Smoked ones on sourdough, covered in sriracha. So
it's a win.
Anyway, it is. I know it's not just me, and that's one good side of social media, is that people are more honest now, and I appreciate that more than anything else in human beings, is people who are honest about things. Which is not that common, really, is it, people to actually
not the good side of stuff, because I noticed that with my personal one, is that everyone thinks I'm having the time of my life. Bali is a classic one. Like, you're probably the only one. I haven't spoken about it heaps, so I've done a little bit on the podcast now, but you're the only one who really knows the things I struggled with in Bali as far as my periods and my skin.
You're
and
not good.
and the bloody barley belly twice.
Yeah, that's
and
what
then
I mean. You had a cold
and nah. But we don't know that. Like, and same with your Instagram. You don't put on there those days when you're in debilitating pain and you're stuck on the kitchen floor and the kids are going, "What's wrong with mum?" Like, or you're bleeding so much, or like we don't need people to know the ins and outs all the time. But I guess I just feel really thankful that you've jumped on this podcast and that you've shared your story, because your story in a sense is unique because you've got one hell of a complicated body that must be genetic. But
we don't have good, it's not great in
but the thing is, you have so much understanding now, and you've got 4 small humans who rely on you every single day, and you're going to be the best damn mum because you know what to look out for and you know what's not normal and you know your genetic background a bit, so you're primed for looking for it, whereas I don't believe our mothers were primed for looking for these things in us. Like, I love my mum to bits, but when I first got acne, I went on antibiotics, birth control pill, and bloody straight on, because we didn't know. Well, they didn't know any better. Like, I just think where there's awareness so much more around it. So thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being honest and raw with us. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you. For those listening, I will put some show notes up for you guys. And if you have any questions on things about Megan's story that you resonate with or resonate with your life, or you want to ask Megan, reach out to me and I will pass it on, or I will do my best to answer them as well. So just again, thanks for jumping on. I appreciate your time today.
No problem.